So we've spoken about the issue and about the sector, and I'm hoping that you're all ready to actually see the product and have a play around with it yourself. Am I right? Okay. So we're going to take you through the site itself now. I'm going to ask Charlie Wood, the Campaigns Director of 350 Australia, to join me on the stage here. If you give Charlie a bit of a round of applause, because 350 have been integral to the development of this event and the site and the project. And also, as Charlie joins me here at the podium, I just want to acknowledge the enormous amount of work that's gone into not just this event, but the project in itself by a whole raft of volunteers, staff. People have really put in a huge shift collectively to make this project happen. So Charlie and I will maybe do our Oscars presentation impersonation and tell you some of the key aspects of the fund and some of the things you ought to know as we go through it. Do you want to share the list, Charlie, or how do you want to kick off? I'll kick off. Okay. So you might have gathered that with super there are limitations, and when we developed the project, we could choose to either be restricted by these limitations and not do anything, or do a half-hearted job, or embrace them and just use limitations to be very clear, very transparent, and very honest about what we know. And we've chosen to do the latter, and it's given us a much more powerful and comprehensive project. One of those limitations is that what we've got on SuperSwitch covers the shares that a fund will have across its entire portfolios, or with a particular option that it might provide. So super funds will have different types of what they call asset classes. There's Australian shares, international shares, property, infrastructure, a whole bunch of different things. The shares themselves typically cover about half of the portfolio, and that's what we've profiled because that's what we understand has the biggest breadth of fossil fuel exposure. We want to show you the most useful stuff. Charlie, do you want to take the next point?
Cool. The second feature of the site is that it looks just at fossil fuels. So there's a number of really fantastic sites around now which look at different aspects of super. There's the Asset Owners Disclosure Project, which probably some of you are familiar with, which looks at the broader sort of climate risk beyond just fossil fuel exposure, but also whether super funds are investing in clean tech. And this just looks at fossil fuels, and largely because of demand from our members. We've had a lot of people coming to us asking us for tools and information about where their super fund is investing in relation to the fossil fuel industry, and so that's what this tool is basically about.
And I suppose just an extension of that is that I think it was Mara who mentioned the fact that there are lots of issues out there, lots of very important issues, and we're certainly not trying to say those issues aren't very important and very relevant. So you have things like not just animal welfare and human rights. You've got alcohol, tobacco, gambling, a whole bunch of things. Now we work on fossil fuel issues right now. That's what SuperSwitch covers. However, when you are using this tool to engage with a new fund, you can actually flag all the other things that are of concern to you. We don't want to leave those out at all because they are quite important as well. To skip to the next one, we only profile what's disclosed. All the information that you'll see on SuperSwitch has come from the funds themselves. You'll either find it on the websites of the super funds, or it'll be material that the funds have elected to provide to us directly.
The fourth thing is that the way that we categorise fossil fuel exposure is actually based on a report that we put out earlier this year with the Australia Institute, and there are copies up the back. So when we're looking at companies, we break them down into 3 different categories. Tier 1 in this tool is basically companies that have a large relative exposure, so fossil fuels is basically the mainstay of their business. The second category is companies who may have a large absolute exposure, like a BHP or a Rio Tinto, but in terms of their overall business, it's a smaller proportion. And then the third category are companies which are involved in supporting or facilitating the fossil fuel industry through, for example, finance, like the banks, or engineering companies.
This is the report. climate-proofing your finances, making your money fossil-free. And for those of you who are watching this online, you can get this from the resources section of the Market Forces website, and also the 350.org.au has it available on their site as well. And the breadth of coverage across the industry is the final thing before we launch into the site. So we've started with 35 of the largest super funds in Australia. We cover 75% of all managed funds with that. So that means that in some cases, we're still to get to your super fund. For probably 25% of the cases, we're still working on it. We'll upload more as we go along. But we've covered the funds that are the largest funds in Australia who have managed funds, so the biggest industry and retail super funds, and of course we've included a lot of the more, the less fossil fuel exposed options as well, because of course this is very much about choice. So let's go into the site. Great. So Isabella here, volunteer with 350, is going to help test out the site and do a bit of a trial run for us. So
I haven't seen it yet.
Do you mind telling us who your super fund is?
With Vic Super.
Vic Super. Okay. Nice one, Bob. Still recruiting. Okay, so I'll bring the mouse up here.
Cool.
So it'll search for your super fund.
In here?
Yeah, maybe. Shall I type it here?
Sure.
So, Vic Super. All right. So, here's what we know about Vic Super. I might just scroll down a touch there. So here's how we present the data. So the first thing we've done is everything that we've known about their shares, we have graphed and we have mapped out based on those tiers that Charlie mentioned. So you've got tier 1 down the bottom, which looks like we don't have exposure with Vic Super's main option, which is great. Tier 2, there are, actually no, that is tier 1, beg your pardon. So tier 1, you've got a number of companies there, looks like around about 5-6%. Tier 2, not very much at all. Tier 3, which are those companies that support the industry, so there'll be the banks, the insurance companies, the engineers. There's a chunk there which is the dark blue, the known fossil-free exposure. And then, unfortunately, with Vic Super's case, probably one of the biggest limitations there is that there's 80% plus is unknown. So we'd love to be able to give them a better rating, but that's as far as we can get. I mean, any first impressions based on what you see?
It's not great. Not enough of this colour. And I think the lack of disclosure is really worrying.
So let's scroll up a touch there as well. So what you won't see on Vic Supers as well is that where it's got at the top there, overall/default. So what we do is we bring up by default all the holdings across the fund, or if we don't see that, we'll show you the default option, which is normally called a balanced fund. We'll also have, if there's one available, a sustainable option. We don't have that there and available for Vic Super. They're obviously very welcome to send it through. So what you'll see, if you keep scrolling down there, you'll see the actual companies themselves. So some familiar faces in there. Any that sort of raise your eye a little?
What, sorry, what happens if you click on them?
If you click on the company, so this is great. So you click on the company, it'll show you which tier it's in. It'll show you why it's in that tier. It shows you the type of company it is. And then any funds that we're aware of that are invested in that company, you'll see a list. So as you go through the site, you can search by fund, you can search by companies, and you can also look up the tiers themselves if you click on about the companies. Hopefully those of you watching online are playing along at home and a few steps ahead. But then once you get down to the bottom, you've got different options that you can take. You can ask Vic Super to come up with a fossil-free option. You can ask for fossil fuel divestment, and you can ask for disclosure. They've only disclosed their top holdings, so you can ask them to disclose. Why don't we try that one?
Cool.
We might need you to not fill that in if you want to be sensitive with your personal information. But you'll get taken to a form, you can fill that out, and basically use that money as a force for good. Yep, the letter gets populated with the information that you put in and gets sent off, and then it's up to the super fund to respond to your needs.
Cool, great. Can I look at the other ones?
Absolutely.
Same kind of thing.
So you can ask, you ask them to divest.
Great.
Oh. So, just staying up here for a tick, there might be some more we can show you. So, just to take you to the main parts of the site, there's an about section that I won't go to there because it just elaborates on everything we've said, but it's a great way of just appreciating the what we've needed to deal with, the information, and just some of the things to keep in mind as you look through the site. The issue itself, which I would go to, except Mara has captured it incredibly well about the scale of the challenge. If you click on About the Companies, it'll list the companies by tier. So anyone who's a tier 1 company we've listed down there. There's obviously quite a lot because we have literally researched hundreds upon hundreds of different companies as part of this project. So you'll see the tier 1, the tier 2, and those companies that are the investors like your ANZ. You've got engineering contractors. And again, just as we'd like to see change within the super funds, we of course want to see change within these companies. So we'll update not only the data on funds, but also the data about the companies. And if an engineer stops working in fossil fuels, then they'll drop off the list of being a tier 3. That's great. If one of the tier 2 companies says, no, we've had enough of the coal business and we're going to drop that and we're not going to have any more fossil fuels, great, they drop off the list. So it will all change over time, and hopefully, based on the engagement from all of you, we'll look up another one of these funds. Let's browse some of the super funds. Let's go to Australian Super. So, they've disclosed a bit more, but we want to see that light blue part of the bar increasing over time. We want to see the grey decreasing, and of course, most importantly, we want to see those red parts of the bar decreasing over time. And there's a whole bunch of things you'll be able to do to actually affect that change. So one other way that we've put the information on funds that you can see is to compare the funds. I might let Charlie talk you through this part.
So basically what we've done here is list the funds in terms of the degree of fossil fuel-free exposure. So the companies that they're invested in that aren't listed in those tiers 1 to 3. So where we've got enough information, we can provide a percentage, and as you'll see in the unknown, where the fund hasn't disclosed, that means that often the known fossil-free percentage is lower. So we're really trying to encourage more disclosure because then we can provide more information about the degree of known fossil-free exposure. So you can scroll through there and see which are some of the funds that have that greater degree of exposure to companies that aren't involved in the fossil fuel industry. And then you can click on them and learn more about them.
So any other funds that you'd like us to particularly look into? We've got, this is by the most sustainable options. One of the things that is quite apparent by when we put together this data and we look at this list, it's very obvious, is that the more you disclose, the more we know not just about your fossil fuel holdings, but your fossil-free holdings. And so, we think disclosure is very important. It's obviously a step towards divesting from fossil fuels in and of itself, but you'll find funds that are close to the top of this list up there, largely because we know that they've disclosed all of their holdings or most of their holdings. One case to point out, local government super, they've done a great job. They've actually provided all of their holdings, but we've still got them as 21% unknown because we're still sifting through hundreds of companies that they've provided in their list that we're still trying to make up the difference. But they're sitting well in terms of the fossil-free exposure. Of the ones that are fully disclosed, you can see how it pans out. Typically, the ones that are at the top, they've done right by us and by their members in actually disclosing their full information, and they turn out much better. So we're familiar with Australian Ethical. Of course, they've got some holdings remaining in some gas companies, which we'd love to see them divest from, but in the meantime, they're 87% fossil fuel free, 91% fossil fuel free, right at the top of that list. And for those of you who are wondering about Future Super, that's a product that's I believe has just come out, and so we've got some data on them, but hopefully you'll be hearing a lot more about them as well soon. So with that, that's a great segue into the Q&A. What about UniSuper? We'll start with that. We're going to go into the Q&A now, so we'll take that as the first question. So Charlie and we have Isabella as well running the roving mic, so we'll take questions from the front from anyone. The first question was, what about UniSuper? I can look that up for you. And UniSuper is a really curious one as well, a really important one, because it's such a huge industry. Now, here's their overall, or default fund. This is their balanced fund. Again, we only know about 24% of what they've got, and you can see the split of fossil fuel-free, tier 3 companies. It's a small amount, but of course we're wary about that section. Now, interestingly, they've come out with a sustainable option that they have disclosed holdings, but we are, because they haven't provided the percentages to us, we've been unable to map them up here. So we're hoping to get more of that data. Now, they've come out saying that, say, they haven't got exposure to those heavy fossil fuel companies, so that's great, and that's in their product disclosure statement. So that's a really positive step from them. And to be honest, it's the latest in a whole bunch of great steps from individual funds and other institutions moving to divest themselves of fossil fuels this year. So hopefully we'll be able to show that up as a lot more light blue than grey in future. In the meantime, it's grey, but we're taking it from them that they have introduced a sustainable balanced option, and that's just come out in the last couple of days. So you can also check it on their website with the PDS, the product disclosure statement.